Enjoy your meeting.
As your users' needs change.
Just a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded.
Sorry about that. Just forgot to press the record at the beginning, so continue on.
Not a problem. So with this, think about your annual operating plan. So I think about this from a budgeting standpoint, and as we look at this, there are growing dependencies on technology requiring investment in business intelligence. We hear about big data all the time, the analytics that come from that, the mobility that some of our field people have, and the apps that they use. I used to work in healthcare, and we used products on tablets to record vital statistics that were secure, as an example. And then you have the decision to take things to the cloud and use more SaaS models, where instead of having our own server farm, we may bring the software in from a server provider and use that through a cloud solution. So all of these things are changing the way we look at aligning our commercial agreements, but also the security and risk around the solutions themselves. And all of those have to be addressed working with the business and with the IT group. We have competing internal demands that challenge us. What is the latest and greatest? One example is we go through iterations of hardware, an iPad 2, an iPad 3, an iPad 4. When do you invest? When do you not invest? Those are some decisions we struggle with. Budget constraints, sometimes in uneconomic certainty times. We'll have plans for purchasing certain equipment and software in certain quarters, have rollout implementation plans set up with our supply base, but then for some reason capital budgets can be frozen at a moment's notice based on the performance of the company or maybe the borrowing cost of money. It really depends. And so sometimes you have to re-justify projects or delay projects. So as sourcing professionals and IT groups, we have to be flexible and be ready for those type of contingency plans and develop mitigation to go with that so that the business doesn't, fall on their face because they don't have the technology they need to service your customer base. And I guess finally, another one I'll mention, we're going to talk about this today, is the complexity and the accuracy of your existing IT asset inventory. And that really gets to the software and the licensing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. That's one that SAM is becoming more and more important to more organizations. There are a few more challenges I'll also bring up. Ask yourself these questions. Is my IT organization positioned to meet the needs of the enterprise going forward? Is the organization strategically aligned with the enterprise? And that's not just the procurement group who's serving IT, but that's IT serving the business. So as a steward of the business's pocket purse and spending of the money and sourcing, go through some questioning and qualification with the IT group as they're a business unit, and then go on through to the business that the IT project may serve, and just make sure everyone is aligned. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Tollgate process. Ask yourself, is the IT supply base right for the future? Do they have the right strategies that line up with the changing strategies within our own organization? When we design and implement our sourcing practice, we want to align prior to sourcing to the IT asset to ensure that it's cost-effective, strategically aligned to the outcomes that are approved and completed on time to meet the business's technical operating requirements. So really thinking about, does it meet the demand of the organization? Are we strategically aligned? Do we have the right supply base for the right now and in the future? What elements of risk does this sourcing initiative eliminate or bring to the environment? So you have to address that during the process. And what can you do about those? So a little bit more about transformational IT, and then we'll get into the guts of what we're talking about here. So after looking at some of these challenging forces, let's recap some IT sourcing objectives to practice. Align the correct sourcing method to meet those business objectives, not just the IT objective. And we all know that's very difficult. IT sees themselves as a business in itself, and I respect that, but we all serve our end customers and the people that are directly touching our customers. Use a life cycle of hardware as part of your sourcing strategy to increase the monetary leverage. And then remove risk of misalignment between the business and IT with the Tollgate process, and a statement of work if needed internally for any highly technical or expensive IT investments. So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition over into aligning ourselves and start talking about some best practices to really fulfill these challenges. First, the IT sourcing and vendor management strategies must be fully integrated, aligned, and complementary to the business strategy and mission. I call this the IT strategic plan. For example, the CPO should challenge the CIO and the CFO to rank and list their top 10 IT projects during the budgeting process for the coming year. So say in the fourth quarter of 2015, I would have been asking my CFO and my CIO or CTO, what are the top 10 projects that the business has come to you from the summer to the fall asking you to plan for and align resources for, both financially and from a human resource standpoint, in order to engage and fulfill the business needs for the coming year. This enables strategic sourcing to develop a best and right supplier partnerships going forward for more successful by aligning with the technical and business plans that IT and the business are building into their budgets.
It was kind of like we were just going back and forth, and you said an extra, so you're sure. So if there is one, then then it would be mine.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I think somebody was not on mute. Craig, please continue. Please, if you are not, please put your phones on mute. We'd really appreciate that. Thank you. Craig, please continue.
Thank you, Roger. All right. So moving forward, you've got your top 10 list for the year, to steal an expression from David Letterman. Then what we have to do is we have to effectively develop a vendor management strategy with the supply base that optimizes the value and support of the IT strategic plan. And then finally, this effective IT vendor management discipline will cut back on the time you spend managing suppliers because you already know that your risk has been mitigated and their strategic support of you has been developed during the sourcing process and through the commercialization process. So to recap this one, really, we're talking about alignment of the business to IT back to procurement as you take this to market through your 7-step process, and we're going to talk about a Tollgate process to really help you do that. Okay, let's talk about the IT strategic plan. Once the top 10 list has been established and the use of the Tollgate process, it will ensure that you maintain the list's integrity and alignment as the plan becomes actuals during the operating year. The vendor management piece will also provide an important follow-up to the sourcing events after their conclusion to ensure that the IT supply base is delivering on its commercial commitments, SLAs, break-fix coverage, software assurance, and quarterly business audits to make sure that all of the KPIs are in place. With that said, I'm going to quickly move now into what I consider to be the Tollgate process that really will encompass and surround your 7-step process.
Hey, Craig, before you go ahead and move on into the Tollgate process, I think for those folks, we have an intersection of people on the phone. You mentioned the 7-step process. And we have, I know, a number of BPM practitioners on the phone, people who are from sourcing and IT. So if you could shed some light, how you've leveraged some of the best practices of both quality, Six Sigma, as well as the 7-step, AT Kearney sourcing process, as well as where IT drives. We find this fascinating of this Tollgate process is an intersection of like 3 best practices you can see in the industry.
Roger, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, let me do this. I'll take them through it. I'll give some examples of what we're really talking about here. The Tollgate process itself is fairly simple. It's 3 stage gates that really pace strategy, people, and financial objectives through your sourcing process. Now, through this, you can use results from Six Sigma. You could also use other best practices that complement the value that we're trying to drive. But let me use sourcing as the example, but this Tollgate process can be used for any type of implementation project that you're doing within your organization or with a customer, where you're really signing off on and aligning at each stage, and you're clearly understanding what data and what decisions are being made, and you're getting your C-level players, your mid-level management, your business, or your customer to buy in and agree before you move on. It's really just calling a timeout and really entering into a letter of agreement at each stage until you actually commercialize. So, Tollgate process number one. We're going to source servers for the organization. Well, before we do that, we need to know what the inventory of current servers are, what are the future needs based on the project list in the next year, and are we going to buy those servers, or are we going to take those to the cloud and maybe rent space from some service provider? So we have to get the strategy from the IT and hardware group to understand how they want to manage the business going forward. Just from a memory standpoint, we look at the best return on whether we want to purchase servers or we want to rent space, and we get the finance group involved in that to improve the ROI on the project. And then we actually look at the service providers after we make the decision whether we're going to go external or internal, and we agree on the benefits, the savings, and the targeted potential supply base that we're going to go to and survey as we go through our 7-step process. And we sit down, and our business leaders, our technical IT leaders, and our procurement leaders and our finance leaders all agree and sign a document called our Tollgate 1 document. And it has all of the key data and decision points written down. We sign off on that, we date it, and we all share it to show that we're aligned. Then we move into kind of the heart of the sourcing process for 7-step, and that is we conduct the event, we collect the results, we review, we make cuts, we may do counter, we may go back to market for a second time, and this is in what we call our Tollgate 2. Once we have the best results we believe that meet not only the technical but also the monetary and business goals, we put those results on our Tollgate 2 document, and we make a selection, and we let the business make the selection. That might be a collaboration between IT and field service, or it might be just the IT group, because business sometimes entrusts IT to make those decisions. But as a procurement leader, you have to make sure that everyone agrees on how that process is done and that the right decision is made that everyone agrees on. This way there's no second guessing once you've passed this Tollgate. You document that, and this really presents you and puts you in a place where you can make the award to the A chosen supplier for that service for servers, as an example. That document is then signed off. That is done after the award has been made and the supplier has agreed through letter of intent that they will take over the business unless it's an incumbent, and then it may just be a renegotiation of terms, pricing, and service. Then we sign a document that ties that into an intent with our business. So we all internally sign that. We float that past the CFO, the CTO, the CIO, and your CPO. You have signatures from all, and those are dated. Benefits, chosen supplier, and service to be awarded, duration of contract, all the intended things that we're going to get ready to commercialize and implement. Now we move to Tollgate number 3. So you have 2 signed documents in the drawer. We hopefully don't have to go back to those, and we're really going to go to the MSA, and that's where we move into commercialization. We've involved legal, we involve IT in the business to get those technical and business considerations and terms beyond just the T's and C's, defining KPIs, defining levels of service. Sometimes people call that entitlement for keeping a system up, as for instance on a server. Backup systems, business continuity plans, all the things that you need to put into a contract around a technical service. And we begin to work with the supplier and the legal team internally to get that done. Parallel to that, we have the project team forming that's going to implement or transition this service for us. And we have a date of commercialization being done and a date that when implementation would begin. We get our timelines built, we get our documents signed, and that contract represents that third toll gate. There's obviously some performance and implementation hurdles that have to be hit, but that MSA really represents the Tollgate 3. So those signatures then become the business officer, the supplier's officer, signing that as two coterminous signatures to execute and begin the relationship. Just a little bit more on Tollgate. What's important here is the process involves a lot of communication and approval of business, finance, and IT. Procurement, we're the facilitator, but you've got to have those three pieces aligned. And this process helps those resolve any issues or misalignments, and it helps to align all of your goals, not only of the business and IT, but also the expected benefits from the project, because you're always checking back and pausing to make sure everyone's still sitting and looking in the same direction. The Tollgate process, what you need to have is you need to have this for every single commodity that you source. And not only that, every single project that you go to market with. So you could have, over the course of a year, if you're a $100 million category spend and you've got, say, 6 different commodities in that, $20 million each, you could have 2 or 3 toll gates for each $20 million commodity, say if you're sourcing 3 each. So 3, 6, 9, 12. You could have 15 toll gates going on in 1 year across $100 million. So you want one of these for every single RFP that you take to market across a specific commodity. Very important. It's almost a management tool that sits on top of your RFP 7-step process. The outcomes, you'll have a well-defined scope. It eliminates a lot of turf battles by establishing agreement on the outcomes and the benefits from the sourcing event. And it enlists the IT leadership in the sourcing process. And I'll be very direct. I've been in many organizations, and one of my biggest challenges is understanding the culture of the IT group at the business and then how to involve myself in the IT sourcing process. Because for many, many years, IT has really handled their own procurement because it is very technical and very specific. But there's a very effective way to add value by not taking it over, but sitting at the table with them. And that's really the approach that I've taken that I've found is most successful for not only myself to get involved, but the outcome for the business, which is ultimately what we're trying to do with our. All right, our third practice that I'm going to get into today is SAM, and this is software asset management. If you haven't heard of this, I'll explain what it is. For those of you who are very familiar with it, hopefully this will spawn some new ideas of how to use it in your day-to-day practice. But what software asset management does is it provides you a view into your current inventory of licenses within your enterprise. Some companies have this software sitting on their platform. Others use third-party services. And unfortunately, some people wait until, say, a Microsoft comes and conducts an audit and then gives you a bill for the number of licenses that you haven't reported. That can be in the millions of dollars. I've certainly seen that happen. So there's a lot of risk mitigation here that can come from this process. So to give you a real-world example, annually conduct a SAM audit with any reputable service provider or your own internal IT back office group to derive valuable information for these reasons. 1, it reduces the software and support costs by negotiating the right contracts based on having the right number of licenses. When you do the audit, as an example, and I'm kind of getting off of the bullets here and talking from my own experience, what you'll find out is that sometimes getting the right number of software licenses really has to come after you've done an inventory and reconciliation of who's using the licenses that are deployed and who needs the licenses that don't have them. And a lot of times we've been able to reallocate licenses within our own enterprise without even increasing the number, and sometimes we've actually reduced the number of licenses. Now, your software salesman does not want to hear that, but if he really respects the relationship and the value that we're trying to create, he'll understand that that's part of what the process is meant for. It also enforces compliance with corporate security policies across your desktop, server, and mobile standards to avoid, for instance, if there are software programs that have been downloaded that could pose risk to firmware or other midware within your organization, the SAM audit will show you those, bring them to your attention, and you can address those through your corporate policy. It also helps to improve IT productivity by deploying the right kinds of technology quickly and reliably. So you can do a software asset management system. Not only do you audit, but you can deploy, and you can deploy it in the right place and make notifications to people to let them know what steps they need to take in order to sign on and initiate those new software packages. Or you can let them know that you've taken software, as another example. Security, when people leave the organization, sometimes you haven't turned in your software. You can and terminate licenses sometimes as well.
Hey, Craig, just a couple of quick comments.
Yeah.
This is Mike McGee here over at Earthlink. A couple things that we've done in this particular area. Number one is we've built up ramp-up schedules so that, for example, if you're increasing your sales organization to, say, 300 or 400 people, and you have the opportunity to actually establish we're going to throw out lots of licenses, and as you hit thresholds, your discounting starts happening because of volume discounting. We've actually built that into our agreements to do a ramp-up so that you have utilization as you bring on personnel. That's one approach that we've done as far as ramp-up periods are concerned. Another thing that might be helpful, and this is just term language, not termination, but legal terms or commercial terms you can bring to the contract. Another one has been where we do a periodic resnap based on the license utilization measurement. So if you have fluctuations in your personnel using these licenses, the resnap can do an average of the prior 6 months or prior year, and that's your new baseline. And that may be higher, it may be less, but things of that nature help the sales organization within the vendor providing the licenses establish a longer and more strategic relationship.
Well, that's a great add, and I can see how if you're selling software or if you use the audit process, it can help make the overall relationship more valuable. So no way do I mean any of those comments to be negative. I just want them to be value added, and that's a great point.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, no
Thank
problem.
you.
All right, I'm going to push forward here and talk a little bit more and see to really wrap up this piece, and then we can obviously entertain some questions. Is the importance of the SAM strategy really is to not only support the projects that you sourced and brought in through using the Tollgate process and making sure that you've met the strategy alignment. The SAM really helps you not only be more effective in what you go to market with, but it helps to really monitor your network and be more effective in policy and procedural, pieces as well. And that really is something that a lot of people, they're intimidated sometimes, but it's because they're used to the vendor coming in and no anything that's negative, but really trying to do an audit. Well, it's better when you've got the information before you're going to conduct an RFP, because then you know what your demand is. And if you know what your demand is, you know what price points you can expect, and you know what the time of implementation might be. So just some other thoughts about how to look at this and how to use it. So that really wraps up the discussion on the best practices around some of the transformational parts of IT sourcing. I'm going to turn it back over to Raj now and see if we have any questions that we want to answer.
Yeah, I had 3 questions come through, and I appreciate the gentleman from Earthlink verbally asking. So before I go ahead and ask these 3 questions that came through directly to me, do I hear anybody, if anybody tried to send any questions via chat, and you don't hear your question asked, please feel free to either go ahead and try to put it again or jump in like the gentleman from Earthlink. So, Craig, one of the questions that I have is that's been asked is, Now, if you go through strategically and you're not able to go ahead and do SAM, what is the overall risk to the organization?
Well, if you decide not to do SAM, and Raj, to the person who asked the question, the risk that I have seen is, in one organization where I was the chief procurement officer, we had to stroke a check for $1.25 million for licenses across a Microsoft Enterprise agreement that we had deployed incorrectly. Now, this was before I'd gotten there, but I didn't have time to, and that's really where I initially learned about, and this has been a few years ago, but that's where I learned about the capabilities of SAM strategically, not only just as risk mitigation. So most of this, from a risk standpoint, is either from things entering your network from a security standpoint that you want to eliminate and finding those, or from a monetary standpoint, protecting yourself from unexpected invoices for having more users than license.
Okay, great. Thanks, Craig. I have another question here, and I think this might be from one of our BPM members on the process side. They want to know, how has the Tollgate process that you're talking about benefited IT procurement rather than using the traditional 5 to 7 step Accenture AT Kearney process? Where do you see the benefit, if you could share that?
Yeah, and I don't mean to repeat myself, but I think the number one benefit for this is, especially in the IT area, a lot of times the procurement group doesn't assist the IT group. And so if you're just trying to centralize or bring procurement under the umbrella of your strategic sourcing group, even if it's in someone embedded or some way that you're assisting them, or if it's just getting a meeting with the CIO and the CFO to get them to let you start, assisting in that sourcing of that spin and controlling that value statement. The Tollgate process, the sourcing process shows them that you know how to go to market. But what the Tollgate process shows is that you know how to manage a project and how to manage their approval and their involvement, and they're really driving the process. So that's really where the Tollgate process laid on top of the 7-step really gives you a little bit more protocol and gatekeeping for those C players who get really nervous when they start to think that they're losing control on who they use or what they use. Now, what it will also do, and you have to be careful with this is political, is that a lot of times a lot of suppliers have relationships with those CIOs, CTOs, or CFOs or business leaders, and they're very appropriate, but this process will put some more, structure around those relationships, because you're going to bring questions to them about alternatives in the Tollgate process that have resulted from the 7-step, and that's an opportunity for them to say, no, that may pose a risk to the business, or they'll have to explain, reasons why they may not want to source a category. And you can stop a sourcing event or a sourcing process with the Tollgate process. You can't stop necessarily a sourcing process with the 7-step process. But the Tollgate gives you the opportunity to say green light, yellow, or red at each point as you're stepping through the sourcing process. So that's another way to look at this. And the most important piece is that buy-in from that senior management or that one area that hasn't been involved in strategic sourcing in the past. This makes them feel like they control the process. And it really does give them that control. Back to you, Raj.
All right, thank you. I've got a series of questions on actual savings, and ironically, I know you and I had talked about this offline, that you're actually driving another webinar that's going to be talking about how to do assessment workshops and savings in the technology space. So I think that, for abbreviated time we have today, we're not going to be able to get into that section, but for those people who are interested, there's 2 methods to learn about that. I know there's going to be a webinar that's going to be scheduled for February on the ability of driving down and taking a look at savings within that category, or you can reach out to Craig, and we'll give Craig's contact information here in a minute. I want to go back to the phone lines. Do we have anybody else who has any further questions before we go ahead and conclude? If not, what I'd like to do is like to thank Craig Cates for this very informative overview on technology sourcing. First, like I said, a few of us have spent many years in corporate America, and there's different ways of maturity that this has been handled. So we'd like to thank Craig. We'd like to thank his team at MetaProcure for helping put this webinar together. For those of you who are interested in gaining more information, you can reach out to Craig Cates at ccates@metaprocure.com, and that's his email. And I even gave it out, Craig, without you publishing it here. But,
that's fine. That's fine. I look forward to hearing from you.
And further, if you do have additional information that you would like to learn regarding the IT sourcing expertise or strategic sourcing in general, please go to metaprocure.com. Furthermore, this webinar today is our first in our series, not only for the TAG organization, but it is the first for the TAG BPM organization, which is the Business Process Group, which will both have additional content related to similar subjects. So once again, I'd like to thank Craig. I'd like to thank the people that have joined the call today. We look forward to hearing back from you, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
And I just wanted to add really fast, once again, on the right at the chat, there is a link to a Google document. If you want to fill that out, we can get your information to directly send you the webinar today.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you, everyone. Y'all have a great weekend.
All right, you guys too. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.